Hello and welcome to Books and Landscape, and my name is Amanda Davey, and I'm continuing my foray into the themes of the South Downs National Park and the churches, chapels and ruined places of worship. This weekend, next weekend will be different, but I'll mention that towards the end. So this is the third in the three themes to do with war across the South Downs National Park, and this time it's the First and Second World Wars. For a number of reasons, this is a more difficult foray into the history and things that have happened near to the churches, partly, or to them, partly because most of us have known people who fought in these wars, so there's a lot of strong emotions involved, but also because none of it was funny. And I'm also going to reference memorials, loss, and Virginia Woolf's sad ending. So please don't feel you need to watch any further if there are any triggers for you. I got triggered this morning by a tame advert for Specsavers, so you never know where they're going to come from. I've missed out the era of the Napoleonic Wars and other engagements, not through intention, but there's a lot to cover without them, and there wasn't actually a great deal that Jane Austen didn't cover in her novels anyway, so here we go. The First World War and its aftermath. Catherington, the church dedication, this is in Hampshire, just outside the National Park. The church dedication changed from St Catherine to All Saints around the time of World War I, when Rear Admiral Sir Christopher Cradock and his crew were killed on All Saints' Day 1914 in the first sea battle of that war, and they are remembered on the war memorial near the church. At Steep, this was where Edward Thomas the poet lived in the village, and his children went to Bedale School next to the church until he joined up in 1916. He was then killed at the Battle of Arras in 1917. He is remembered in the church with 2 Lawrence Whistler windows, although vandalism has been a sadness in recent years, and one had to be re-engraved in 2010. And my photographs didn't work out either, so that's a bit irritating. Tarring Neville is now a tiny hamlet near New Haven, on the east side of the River Ouse, but the World War I memorial marks 11 casualties, which implies a much larger population in the village then to provide those poor bodies. Today's is approximately 27. In 1861 it had been 87. At Funtington, another memorial is to the tragic Spooner family with 4 sons aged 22 to 37 years old who lost their lives between 1915 to 1918. My grandfather had 3 brothers, and although they all survived, thankfully, at least physically, that memorial gravestone still hit me hard. His father still lost his mind, although mercury poisoning may have contributed as well. He was a clock and watchmaker. Patcham, up on the downs to the north, has the Chattree War Memorial of 1921 that was built where Sikh and Hindu World War I casualties were cremated, having died when the Royal Pavilion was used as a military hospital. Lancing College Chapel took from 1855 to 2022 to build, and includes a war memorial cloister that was constructed between 1920 and 1927. Piddinghoe has a useful bypass that dates back to the 1920s, when German prisoners of war built it using materials brought in by boat to the wharf in the village. A very busy rat run uses that line of the road now. I think it might be being amended, but not sure. So then we come to the Second World War, and a bit more obvious rampaging took place. I'll start with our village celebrity, Vera Lynn. She's buried near Simon, north of Clayton Church, down by the railway in the woodland burial ground. She had lived in Ditchling for over 60 years after the war, obviously. It suited her very well, as she was 103 when she died in 2020. The once Forces sweetheart had been a feature of village life all the way through the years. There is a plaque in her memory just outside the porch of Ditchling Church. And my mother was remembering the impact that she had on the forces during the Second World War just this morning. St Dunstan's Ovingdean was built in 1937 to 38, just in time to help veteran service people blinded by the axe of the war that was coming, having begun in London to help servicemen blinded in World War I, founded by a man with cataracts who had founded the Daily Express. At East Weldham in Hampshire, the road that's now called the B3004, that runs up the hill and heads towards Alton, was in 1939 upgraded and straightened to accommodate military traffic and access to the army camps at Borden and Longmoor that were obviously expanding, which has rather hidden the church ever since. West Dean, East Sussex, this is all in chronological order, so I'm darting across the landscape in terms of which churches are where. West Dean in East Sussex has a large tomb in the churchyard next to the tower for Sir John Anderson, who was Lord Waverley. He had instigated the Anderson Shelter in 1938, and many of these were still in gardens in the south in the 1970s. I'm sure that two of my friends at school at least had Anderson shelters just sort of rotting in the garden. Great fun to play. Coats from 1940 to 41 had Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker of Coates Castle, and he invented the spigot mortar, which became very helpful to the Home Guard in providing anti-tank ordnance. Spigot's such a great word. Now we come to tricky. In Rodmell, Virginia and Leonard Wolfe had lived in the village from 1919, at least as a summer place to be wintering in London. By March 1941, Virginia's inner demons had melded presumably with the visible demons and anxiety of the Battle of Britain and the Blitz, followed by the constant bombing raids up the Ouse Valley and everything that was happening in London. By then, the rumours of the ways Jews were being treated by the Germans were getting through, even if she didn't know just how bad things were. It cannot have helped that she was 59, with the extra emotional problems that age can bring. Vapour trails filled the skies, even when the planes couldn't be heard. The path she took was not the one past the church that is there now. As far as it appears, she went along the line of the droveway to the floodplain pastures, down to the river where she drowned. Just outside Petworth is a sort of secret garden churchyard at Hampers Green, with the disintegrating chapel fenced off for safety. In 1942, Petworth Park was occupied by the Canadian Army, and a German bomber attacked on the 29th of September, aiming for them. It was a mishit that fell on the nearby school, killing 28 children and 3 adults. In the churchyard there is still a well-tended memorial in a long shared grave. A bit happier. In Berwick, during World War II, Duncan Grant and Vanessa Bell, obviously Virginia's sister, between 1942 and 1943, with her son Quentin Bell, painted the distinctive memorials within the church. This included 3 local men as models for the Army, Air Force and Navy, one of whom did sadly die not much later. While the Bloomsbury group were famously conscientious objectors, they farmed and contributed to the war effort that way while recording their emotions in their writings and art. In Languish, the church had been built by the inhabitants of the Languish Lodge estate in 1867-70. In World War II, New Zealand troops were billeted in that house. Stanmer unexpectedly had the Canadian troops apparently trashing the old rectory just north of the stables in the village. It doesn't square with Canadian temperament as far as people would have it. Strange. At Standine Bordine, both names, there had been a village up in the folds of the Downs that had shrunk over the centuries for many reasons that almost certainly included access to water by the time the chapel and remaining buildings were destroyed in military training in World War II. The site of the chapel is marked by a small plinth that walkers often come across. It's in lots of photographs. The build-up to D-Day and on to after the end of the war. At Droxford, in early June 1944, Winston Churchill and all the Allied commanders met in secret in a railway siding at Droxford Station on the short-lived Mearn Valley Railway. It was only there from 1903 to 1955, it's now a public footpath, to prepare in brutal secrecy for the D-Day landings. I don't know they were allowed comfort breaks. Burton Park was one of the muster sites for D-Day, having been in army use after the war. It became St Michael's Petworth, girls' boarding school, and is now apartments, which has helped fund the church. Nearby at East Lavington, now Seaford College, the main house and grounds that had once been Bishop Wilberforce's home. There'll be another video on Samuel Wilberforce and Cardinal Manning. But Bishop Wilberforce's home became the headquarters for the commandos and was another place involved in the planning for the D-Day landings in June 1944. It also has been at a school since 1946 and this time still is one. At Upwaltham, the Four Nations Memorial Walk commemorates at least 2 World War II crash sites in the valleys near to the church, both occurring in thick fog, with Americans, Canadians, Australians and British crewmen on board. One was in February 1944 and the other was February 1945. They didn't expect the Downs to be quite so high. Newhaven Cemetery. Most churches across the Downs include Commonwealth war graves, but Newhaven sadly has the highest number of any within the national park, with 29 from World War I and 46 from World War II. The British Legion also purchased a grave for an Irish nurse, Elizabeth Mary Collins, who had been in the resistance in France and helped escapees after getting trapped there in 1940. She died in 1952. And lastly, Priory School Chapel Lewis was built after a lengthy fundraising campaign of about 18 years in 1958 to 60. So 18 years from 1942. The idea had formed in the heart of the headmaster, Neville Bradshaw, of what was then called Lewis County Grammar School for Boys in 1942, when he realised that a good number of his boys would not return from the war. In the end, 55 were lost and the chapel is officially a war memorial. Not the easiest one to do, certainly not the easiest one to watch, so thank you for watching if you managed it. It would be great if you could like, if you could subscribe, if you could comment, and next weekend is the beginning of something called Indie Author Week UK, which is an initiative started by friends in Liverpool, which is now covering the whole of the United Kingdom, hence the UK, to celebrate and promote the independence of independent authors. And I'm going to be doing evening book readings or piece readings from pieces that surround the books that are already out, or pieces that may or may not be part of books that are coming up that I'm working on. And that will be live, fingers crossed I managed to pull that off, between live at 6 o'clock from the 6th of June through to the 13th of June. And I'll put the schedule into the descriptions box. Thank you very much for watching, and yeah, it'll be much happier next week. Much happier. This was tough. Thank you.